Welcome to Exploring Computing. Today's video is Linking Web Pages, Part 2, Formatting Links. So in the last video, we took a look at linking different web pages and what our options are when using links. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can format your links. And along the way, we'll learn about pseudo classes, which can be used for quite a number of other formatting purposes in addition to links. So you've all probably seen a link that looks like this. This is the standard appearance of a link. It's underlined and it's blue. So let's first take care of that underline. So if you want to play around with the underline, that's actually controlled by the text decoration style property. And you can get rid of it by setting text decoration to none. So here I've got a rule that says, hey, all anchors, and remember, these are being created by ahref, so that's an anchor tag. All anchors turn the text decoration off. You should be cautious about this though, because people see that underline and they think it's a link. Also, as a side note, a related note, be cautious about underlining things that aren't links because people are used to things being underlined as being links. So they're going to try and click on it and they're like, why is this thing not working? This website's busted. All right, so if you decide you don't like that underline for your links, now you've got an issue where you've got a bunch of things that are links on your web page, but like, how does the user know that they're links? So here I've got a bunch of colored words, and are these links? Are they not links? Which of these are links? It's really hard to say. And so 106E students, we'll talk about this later in the quarter. We've got a lecture on human-computer interaction, and there's what's sometimes referred to as an affordance, which is a way of saying your user interface should make it clear to the user that there's some sort of interaction that can occur. And ideally, it should give you a sense of what interaction can occur. And so a common example of this is, we've had those glass doors, and, if there's a push bar on there, it's very clear that you're supposed to push it. And if there's a handle, that's easy to grab, that's generally a sign that you should pull it. So those are called affordances. They're something that the human brain looks at and says, oh, I see how I'm supposed to interact with this. And by removing the underlines here, you've basically removed the affordance that's telling people that, oh, that's a link, I should go ahead and click on it. So be cautious. All right. You can also, if you want to gussy them up, you can go the other direction and be like, hey, I don't want just an underline. I want an overline and an underline. So it turns out you can do this by just setting text decoration and putting both overline and underline with a space between the two. And that'll create this effect you're seeing here. Okay. Another thing that happens with links is the links are different colors, right? So, we've seen the standard links. They're pretty boring. So, if you don't want to use the standard links, I think that totally makes sense. But we have seen these all before. So I'm going to start off with these for now. We've got these standard links. And, if you've played around with the web for a while, you probably realize that first article, that's a link to another web page. And the second one is a link to another web page, but I've already visited that other web page. It turns out that there's a third color associated with links. I don't know how many people actually realize this. I don't think I did until I started playing around with these, the back end, learning how to actually make the web pages. But there's a third color where you actually click on the link while you are currently pressed down on that link with like the mouse. And I assume the same thing happens with a finger. I haven't really noticed it with a finger, but if you are actively pressing down before you release the mouse, and presumably before you lift your finger, it actually changes to a third color. So there's a standard color, there's a visited color, and then there's a color while actively clicking on the link. So there's a problem with this, and the problem is how are we going to do this? How are we going to create these colors? So one thing you can imagine is, I can have one class for links that I haven't visited and a second class for links that I have visited. So .link, hey, the color's blue. .visited, the color's purple. But the problem with this is, okay, here's the HTML for that. I've got the two links, and one of my mark as class equals link, and one of my mark as class equals visited. But the fact that somebody has visited a page actually varies from one person to another. So unless I serve up different versions of my HTML file to different people, depending on whether or not they've visited links, this does not work. I can't have class equals visited for some people if they have visited that page before, and class not having visited for other people. I can only serve a single version of the HTML file. And so there's no way to distinguish whether or not an individual person has visited that or not. So seems to be kind of a problem. I mean, it would be really nice if I could do this. And so it actually turns out the solution basically does look like this, but it's a little bit different because the computer automatically adds this sort of what it refers to as a pseudo class. So it acts as if there's a class on these anchor elements, either link or visited, depending on whether the person has visited that web page or not. But it's sort of added internally by the web browser. And so I serve up just, when my web server is serving up copies of the HTML file to people, it does not have marked whether it's visited or a regular link because it doesn't know. And then when the person gets that file, their web browser sort of figures out, it's like, oh, I see that's a link. Oh, that link you've actually visited, so that's going to fit in the pseudo class visited. I'm going to pretend it is as if there was a class equals visited on it, even though it's not actually in the original HTML source. This one you haven't visited, so I'm just going to assume that I'm going to act as if this is class equals link instead of the class equals visited, even though, again, none of those are actually present. It's as if there was a class on it, but the class is not actually on the elements. It's something that the web browser is dynamically working out on its own. And we're going to distinguish between real classes and pseudo classes because the pseudo classes are going to have colons in front of them instead of dots in our style sheet. So here I've got 3 pseudo classes: :link, :visited, and :active. So :link, that's going to be the pseudo class when I have a link on my web page and the user has not visited that link before. :visited, that's going to be the pseudo class associated with an A tag if there's a link on there and the user's actually visited it. And then :active, that's going to be the pseudo class associated with an A tag when somebody's actually actively clicking on it. Now, when you actually write these out for your style sheet, you actually want to put the A in front of this. So A: link, A: visited, A: active. So we're combining the fact that, hey, I want this to apply to anchor tags, and I don't want it to just apply to any anchor tag. I want this to apply to anchor tags where we've got that active pseudo class :visited, or where we've got that active pseudo class :active. Why do we need to put the A: there? It turns out there's a bunch of pseudo classes, and some of these actually work on different elements. So just using the example we've got here, A: active, that's the color when somebody clicks on a link. There's also a button: active where somebody clicks on a button and you want the button to change color. If we were to just say :active, it would not be clear to the web browser whether this applies to link colors or to button colors or to both. And I think it would actually just use it for both, but that may not be what you want. So definitely put the A: in front. And so here's the example again. I've changed the colors because who wants to use the standard blue and purple? So we can see, so I've got my links, and you could say, I'm saying if I've got a link, normal link, that should appear in red, visited link, that should appear in green, and active link, that should appear in blue. There are a bunch of other pseudo classes. There's actually quite a few. Here's some of the fancier, handier ones. So there's a first child and a last child. So let's say you have a list of items, and you want to do something different with the first item in the list. Like maybe you want that first item in the list to have a bit of extra margin in front of it. Or, maybe the last child, you want to put a line underneath the last item. And so these are you're going to be able to use these on your elements. So you're going to be able to use these in your style sheets to select particular elements. And then there's the nth child. So nth child 3 that says, hey, here's a style rule, but I only want it to apply to the third element of this list of elements. Or let's say you're trying to do zebra striping on a table. That's where you've got some sort of a table, and every other line is a different color. So you've got like a bunch of dark gray lines and a bunch of light gray lines. It looks a little bit nicer. It's a little bit easier for people to tell what's going on with the table. You can do that using the nth child odd and nth child even. And so that would be a rule where you say, hey, every odd element in this table, I want to use this particular style, and every even element on this table, I want to use this other style. So those are pseudo classes. So that's it for our discussion on links. We've learned quite a bit more about links from the HTML side, and we also learned a bit about styling them. And this idea of pseudo classes can come in handy in a bunch of other places as well. All right, I'll talk to you soon.